I think it's a very, very difficult question. I mean, finding fairness is hard enough in this part of the world regarding Israel, where it's incredibly difficult. I will say there are some people that sort of. Let me take a step back. There's two issues. One of which is increasingly in a splintered media world, what many people want is the news that they agree with, not necessarily the news as is. Well, that's a harder case to provide people with the news that they agree with. And sometimes the news is unpleasant, and it hurts to hear it. And part of what I think, in the end, we are made better is by hearing the news, even the news that we're distressed about. And so on a very narrow level, there are some people who say, I don't want to see, I don't like seeing pictures when the IDF goes in and bulldozes houses in Palestine or in the West Bank. I don't like seeing images in Gaza of people complaining that their homes were hit by Israeli missiles. And I don't like seeing them either, because I think they're painful. And part of me is I don't like seeing Israel inflicting harm on people. But on that narrow issue, it happened. I don't think those are made up pictures. I think they exist. Now, the second question is there enough context to understand them? And I think that is often a problem. It's a problem for television, which has limited time. And it's a problem with this area where the issues are so unbelievably complex. So it's sort of what level of context do you want? And how much time do we have to give it to you? And I think editors often do make mistakes everywhere about just how narrow can we make the story, or what are we, I once saw this great thing that Jon Stewart did on The Daily Show. And he said there was a bombing in the West Bank today, was a retaliation for this, which is retaliation for this, which is retaliation for this, and he kept going as the thing got longer and longer, which is retaliation for the 1967 war, which is retaliation for the 56 war, which is retaliation for the 48 war, which is retaliation, and he went on, right, making the point about just how incredibly complex this is. I think it is a weakness of television and newspapers that we need to do better at, to keep trying to provide context. We don't, we often shorthand things. So the notion of what is state-supported terrorism sometimes falls out of coverage, or, and it's a question of how many times in the coverage of Gaza most recently, though it was done, I know it was done often enough, and certainly not to people's satisfaction, to remind people, for 8 years, there had been these shells flying out of Gaza every single day, right? At what point is Israel justified in saying enough? But it's hard to keep putting that in every single story every single day. Sometimes it gets shorthanded, sometimes it doesn't get seen, and that's a weakness. On the other hand, I think sometimes people have to accept the fact that sometimes Israel does things which are tough to look at, and some would say are wrong to look at. And we as a country, we as an audience, need to see those, whether you agree with them or not. Whether you think that's fair, you need to see it. And for nothing else, you need to see it because you need to see how the rest of the world sees us, sees the Jewish people, and how the rest of the world sees Israel. Israel cannot, we live in a world in which other people's opinions do matter and their resources do matter. We would be a better world, and certainly this on the Arab side, if they could see much more of what we see. And as much as people don't like Al Jazeera and those things, I think they're better because for the first time at least, there's more than one version that they're seeing. There's now 5 or 6 different Arab networks. They have different degrees of moderation. None of them are particularly friendly to Israel, but they have different views about it. And what the Arab world needs to see is there are different views. They need to see there's another reality. They need to see that there are Israelis who want peace. They need to see that there are different views in the Arab world, and that it's not just a monolithic point of view. So I think it's a very difficult topic. I think we're never ever going to satisfy. We as journalists are never ever going to satisfy everybody. I think we need to find ways to do it better. And our biggest weakness, which we struggle all the time, is what's the appropriate context on both sides. I think oftentimes we fail to, especially as we report the day in and day out events, to remind people here's from Israel's perspective why this was done. And the same thing is a weakness. And by the way, if you talk to Arab Americans, they would tell you the story we totally miss is their point of view. Right? They would say, why don't we ever hear in stories, right, that from our point of view, Israel are interlopers on the West Bank, right? It's a military occupation. They have no business building these, building settlements, and whether and how it's seen in their part of the world. I think that's a weakness too. I think it's a shame that on a separate point, that more Israelis don't speak Arabic, and it's a crime that more Arabs don't speak Hebrew, especially since the languages are so close, and especially among the Palestinians and the Israelis. And last time I was in Israel, I had a dinner with some Americans who had moved there, and my wife and I, it was our first trip to Israel. It was a fascinating trip. I mean, I loved it. And we had dinner with some friends of friends, and they said, well, what do you think? And I think this was before the Intifada. So we're like, and it was fresh out of the O.J. Simpson story. I was like, can't we find a way to get along? There seems so much we have in common. Palestinians are strivers. Israelis are strivers. So many people on both sides want peace. If you go, and I spend time in the Arab world, there's so many people on the rank and file who feel like we would be a much better place if we could stop this, right? If we said, accepted Israel, accepted and moved on, and then even found ways to work together. And they said, that's so much easier for you to sit in America and say that. Try living here. And I think that's right.